Thanks for vBrownbag for having us here. My name is Yves Sandfort. I'm a senior architect and CEO of Comdivision, and with me is Matthias Eisner.
Yeah, hello and welcome. My name is Matthias. I'm with the Comdivision group as well, responsible for cloud and management. And that's what we're here for today, aren't we?
Yes, we are going to talk about VRA.
VRA, really. So I'm responsible for cloud, so I got involved in lots of POCs and customers. And that's what I use in VRA is the simple install, right?
Yeah.
So if we take a closer look to the simple install, we have the VRA appliance.
That's
we
easy.
have the IaaS piece of it, right?
Yeah, Windows
They're just talking to each other,
Yeah.
and everything's fine. So it's installed within a couple of hours. You can create blueprints and get everything up and running. And then we have a couple of surrounding supporting systems. So we need Active Directory,
Yeah.
probably SSO is a good idea, isn't it?
SSO, identity appliance, or SSO is a necessity. So either you have an
Yeah.
SSO 5.5 or you use the identity appliance.
I'm going
that.
for yeah. Either or. So we have supporting systems around VRA, and last but not least, we have something we call the cloud fabric. So that's just the endpoint where you're going to deploy virtual machines to. So that works perfectly fine for a POC, set up in a couple of hours, ready to run.
Yeah.
But what if we go into production?
That's clearly not what you should use in production. For production, you really need to have a distributed installation. There are several reasons for that. The main reason for that is if you ever need to actually do simple component upgrades or stuff like that, you will have much longer downtimes, or if you just need to restart services. So for all these specific scenarios, you need to be aware that it's going to be hard with a simple install. And there are actually some scenarios with simple install which are just not to be supported with a production install. So
Not supported. So
that's
your
going to be-
opinion is that's not fitting for production, but I was always thinking you can just use vSphere HA and you're good to go.
No, you should not use this type of implementation really for a production
Right.
environment. This is, even if it's a small install, I see that a day in and day out that customers actually use that for small implementations, but it is actually not meant to be a full-blown production installation. There are tons of scenarios which just actually can break or can otherwise cause issues, and you might run into the situation that even support services tells you should never use that in production.
Probably a short side note, you can't upgrade that one to a newer version.
So yeah, it's always a challenge because these simple installs are not necessarily meant for production, and so there is always a chance that there might not be an upgrade way to actually move this from 6 to 7 or whatever else version. I mean, 7 was announced
Have
this
you-
morning,
Oh,
so
I hope so.
I'm finally allowed to actually speak about 7. But with version 7, there are potentially upgrade passes which might not work or might not be tested because they don't need to, because the simple install is normally meant for POC environments and not for production environments.
All right, so let's start over. So as you can see, the diagram looks a little bit strange, but we just ripped all the pieces out needed for a distributed install. So if we flip the slide, the whole design or the whole infrastructure gets way more complex, as you can see. So I think we structured that diagram in a couple of parts. We have two main parts. On the right hand side, we have everything needed for VRA. On the left hand side, we got everything needed for the supporting systems. So where are we going to start? Let's start with VRA, don't we?
Yeah, I would definitely start with VRA, and yeah, I mean the point here is when we talk about a distributed installation, you can see it's not only the number of virtual machines you are going to grow dramatically, it's also something even more complex. You need load balancers, and this is actually, to be fair, the simplest way of doing a VRA distributed installation. If you were to do the full-blown one, so if you want to actually scale for up to 30,000 VMs or something like that, even this is going to be small. Because what we did here with this design, it's something we used internally as well, is we lowered the number of virtual machines and tried to reduce the number of components here by trying to put the SQL servers onto the nodes and not actually placing additional complexity in.
Yeah. So as always, if we go into production, we need to distribute the installation to achieve a higher availability.
Yes.
We have to add components, additional external databases, probably, yes, no?
Yeah, so for the VRA appliance, you can actually use the internal Postgres database.
Really?
So that's
That
what
sounds
we did,
great.
What we did here. So that also gives another advantage if you use the internal Postgres versus an external one, because if you use the internal Postgres, it's actually VMware's problem to support you with that.
I like that.
Whereas if you were to install Postgres on your own, which you can actually, there are supported versions of it, but then you are on your own with support for it. So that's one of the points. The other story is for the Microsoft SQL Server. So in general, there is the opinion that people think that you need to use a Microsoft SQL cluster for it, which is actually not true. Because the statement which VMware only makes is that you need to have an MSDTC conform setup if you want to actually use it. So you can use availability groups with it. The only thing you need to make sure that you never have more than one database instance active. But then you are actually in a supported state. So you can have availability groups, get around the scenario of using a Microsoft SQL cluster, and actually make it easier from your setup perspective.
That's really good stuff.
Yeah.
So from a VRA perspective, if I got that one right, we just double the numbers. We have 2 VRA appliances, 4 IaaS instances, because we're separating roles on the different instances. So we separate the manager and all the other IaaS components, and then we just throw a couple of LBs in it. So is there anything we have to consider about the load balancer configuration we do?
So it's basically, load balancer is pretty simple when it comes to the web services. So all of them are going to be HTTPS load balancers, so that's easy. The things you need to be a bit aware of, and which should be application load balancers, is the Postgres and the Microsoft SQL pieces. You could use a simple TCP load balancer for that, but the disadvantage of that is they are hard to react on application failure. So it's better to use something like an F5 or anything which actually understands the application. But in theory, you can use an Apache or whatever else load balancer mechanism for that as well. That works perfectly fine too.
Great, so let's step over to the supporting systems.
Yeah.
So we have 2 categories of supporting systems, like Active Directory plus SSO for authentication. And on the other hand, we have the whole VRO piece, the vRealize orchestrator, which is needed for all the XaaS things we do in VRA. So where do you want to start? Authentication or automation?
I'll start with the authentication piece, I think. It's in general, you just follow the guidelines for SSO availability. So in this case, we use 5.5 for this sample of a design. You could also in theory use PSC, but then you actually really should dig deep into the knowledge base articles, because there are tons of not VRA supported configurations in combination with VRA and PSC. So currently most customers, if you don't really need PSC, just take the SSO from 5.5, it's just easier with that.
So what you mentioned is, and I go back with Fred, who's still here from the previous session, RTFM, right?
Yeah. Read the manual, make sure that you know the release notes. I see that again. I just was involved in a support case where a colleague of ours was at a customer, and they said, oh yeah, we have tons of problems with VRA. And only to find out later that there was a knowledge base article out there already on that specific PSC setup they used, that it's not supported in combination with VRA. So be sure that if you build something for production, especially a cloud automation platform, that you really understand the architecture before that, because otherwise you are going to be blown up.
Sounds great. So the last supporting system we have is the vRealize orchestrator.
Yeah. So the orchestrator piece, the main thing you need to be aware of for the orchestrator piece is there are 2 ways. You can build it active and active standby, and maybe you can flip it in 30 seconds on what's the difference there.
Something around that. But it doesn't matter, because the workflow just, if a VRO instance fails, the workflow continues to run on the failover instance, so we're perfectly fine, even if the failover takes 30 seconds.
Yeah. Good, so that's great. So one of the final notes before we actually close this one up is one of the things which is going to change dramatically with VRA 7, and you might have seen it on VMworld's keynotes this morning already, is VRA 7 is going to make the install a lot easier. So you will get agents, and you don't need to install all of these components manually anymore. So you basically drop a few appliances in there, deploy a few agents onto a Windows box, and it is really going to make your life so much easier. So if you have a chance to get on the VRA 7 beta and you really want to actually dig into VRA, I would strongly encourage you to actually look more into the VRA 7 instead of actually spending too much time on getting VRA 6.2 distributed set up, because it's really a hassle. Plan for it that you need multiple days for 6.2 currently, whereas for 7 we are going to talk about a couple of hours. Still, it's a distributed instance, so it takes some time.
And it looks more or less the same, kind of, in 7, but the installation process is a lot easier to get everything set up.
And,
we love wizards, don't we?
yeah,
Just
sometimes
kidding.
we love them, but on the other hand, if you have ever gone through the VRA 6.2 manual install for distributed installation, which is just a lot of work, then VRA 7 is going to really be an eye-opener for you. So that's going to make your life easier.
Okay, so what we have done so far, we added lots of availability to the current infrastructure.
Yeah.
But I know one of your favorite topics is, or are SLAs and backup and restore. So we need to add more availability using backup mechanism. Probably we can use a vSphere feature like replication.
Yeah,
So how do we back up and replicate our VRA distributed installation?
So this is one of the things we added to the design, and we just want to quickly cover that. We could actually spend far more time on that. But the point here is, normally when you do the deployment, you actually only have your single install. And as you might be aware, vSphere replication cannot be used to replicate one vCenter by itself. So you cannot actually protect vCenter by itself with vSphere replication as long as you don't replicate it into another vCenter. So the simple trick we do here is we actually create a security zone within our cloud cluster and actually replicate everything from the management cluster into the cloud cluster, so that in worst case we can basically start up most of the components in the management cluster in the cloud cluster. Yes, there is a security risk with it, but on the other hand, we don't have to go back a day or two to the latest backup of a vCenter server, because if you use link clones and everything in combination with VRA, you need to have your vCenter backup being as up to date as possible. So that's a great way to actually make that work.
So I totally understand. So what you're saying is, if we use vSphere replication to replicate the whole VRA distributed installation to the backup side, we can go down to I think it's a minimum time window of 15 minutes?
It's 15 minutes as long as we use an external storage. If you were to actually use vSAN with it, you could even go down to 5 minutes with
Really?
vSAN 6.1.
But that has to be a new feature.
That's vSAN 6.1, so that's the newest one. So another great new feature which will make your life a lot easier.
All right, so we covered the distributed installation, covered all the load balance and database stuff.
We quickly covered it.
We quickly covered it, but we don't make the time slots in here.
Yeah.
So we covered replication, how to back up, probably famous last words about backup, not doing restore, but about backup. So just use normal backup to back up the appliances?
Yeah, so it's ideally, that's why we use not the SQL clusters and stuff like that, but actually we use SQL availability groups and stuff like that. We can actually just take backups of the VMs. So on top of the vSphere replication, we just use Veeam or VDP or whatever else to back up our virtual machines, and then we are good to go. Okay?
Right. All right.
Great. So I think that's more or less it. So
all set up, ready to go for a VRA distributed installation.
Great.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Enjoy VMworld.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.